Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Our regular viewers already know that I am so conservative that even Ron has to approach me from the right side. For those who are new to this, means that this is not a safe space for those who are easily offended by having their ideas challenged or by our satire. This is broadcast number 131, and this week we have Dr. Robert Stewart from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary joining us to look at the question, is Christianity too narrow? My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And Ron Hensel is our senior researcher who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ron.
Yes, I came up on the left one time and it wasn't pretty, was it, Don? We won't even talk about that. Let's not go there. Okay, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow. Now we have 12 more months of summer. But today it's a little chilly. In any case, our program is brought to you in part by the Bible Buffet. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience. And the Designer Jesus collection. No longer need your church's Jesus be a source of social embarrassment. Check out the Designer Jesus location. And if you like this program, or if you really are annoyed by it and want to inflict it upon others, please, to ensure your continued access to this program, go to MidwestOutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you. And back to Don.
And here we go. So today we're talking about the question of, is Christianity too narrow? And I want to put up a thing here, if I can get my little screen to advance. I am going to, yes, I am, share some photos here from our fairly recent tour to the Parliament of the World's Religions. In the top corner here, we have, I don't even, Bill Hunsberg, I should have him on here. He could tell us exactly who these guys are, but they do what I call the kind of the bullfrog song. It's just a very low chant. They're Buddhist. And then we have American Indians, and we have a whole collection of various religions here. Of course, the Parliament of World's Religions has maybe 8,000 to 10,000 people attending from religions, all religious walks around the planet, literally, that all come together and basically saying all religions are fundamentally the same. Of course, Christianity says that's not true. Christianity is true, and anything not Christianity or in conflict with it is, by definition, false. So here's a question, Bob. Is that too narrow?
Well, I don't think that's too narrow to say that Jesus is the only Savior, to say that every human being is lost and dead in their sins and trespasses, and that we all need to be saved. And that is what the Bible teaches, and Christians have traditionally believed that until fairly recent times historically. So no, it's not too narrow.
Okay, and that is the end of the program.
Okay.
we have two greetings, by the way. La Generesse says hello from freezing Indiana, and Penjamin says it's not narrow enough, or Gothard loosely quoted.
Well, I've been to freezing Indiana too. It's a pretty interesting place.
Yeah, because it's freezing.
Grow from the ground up.
Well, this is a topic that I dealt with pretty extensively in academics, and I actually edited a book for Fortress Press, which is a left-leaning Christian publisher, and entitled "Can Only One Religion Be True?" And so I know and have interacted with some of the major players in pluralist thinking. For instance, Paul Knitter is a friend of mine. The book that I edited about 5 years ago with Fortress contained the last essay that John Hick wrote. Actually, John died after we had agreed to publish his essay, and between the book coming out in print, and then I negotiated with his son Peter to include a different essay, because Peter wanted to publish the essay that I had originally from John. But actually, the latter essay worked better for the theme of the book.
Okay, so those who do not know, who is John Hick?
Well, John Hick was an evangelical Christian at one point. He's British, or was British, and he was converted through the ministry of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship while he was a university student, and he was one of the world's top philosophers of religion. And over the years, he gradually moved away from evangelicalism to pluralism. And so Hick was fond of saying things like that, well, there are actually phases that you can see in his career, but the mature position was that all religions are legitimate responses to the transcendent, or the real, and that we can't get at God directly. And so he was highly influenced and explicitly influenced. He owned this. He publicly stated it. He wrote it any number of times, that his thinking was influenced by Immanuel Kant, who was a German or Prussian philosopher in the 1800s, who said that when we know things, we know them indirectly, that we never get to the thing in itself. And so that was Hick's position, that we can't get to God directly, and that all of the religions are legitimate responses to the real. And he used that language of the real late in his career, because previously he had said we can't get directly to God. But then he decided, and after much criticism from certain individuals, that God was privileging theistic religions over non-theistic religions. And so the mature position was every religion is a legitimate response to the real, that all religions are partially true and partially false, partially right, partially wrong. And that is the position that's known as pluralism. And,
well, that
be distinguished from universalism.
That's fairly popular, according to Barna, I believe. Nearly half U.S. adults believe it doesn't matter what religion you follow; they all teach pretty much the same thing. That seems to be a fairly common belief.
And did Kant, in addition to saying you can't really know the thing in itself, did he also say you really can't?
So you're saying Kant, no?
Kant, yeah. Yeah, okay. Didn't he also say that you really can't access the metaphysical realm that's inaccessible to us? Or
yeah, well, it's a very complicated theory of knowledge, and we don't directly, and our mind plays a role in what we know, that we have categories of our mind. That traditionally, philosophers had thought that the mind sort of passively received sense impressions. And
well, but in terms of
it's not that way.
In terms of revelation, I get the impression he didn't leave any room for revelation in his.
Right. Yeah, Kant was I would say at least opposed to traditional religion. He did actually offer at least one argument for God's existence, but he rejected the traditional arguments for God, the cosmological arguments, teleological arguments, and ontological arguments. So Kant was kind of like a pro wrestler who plays on both sides of the street. He did some work that we can appropriate as apologists, but he also did some work that we have to respond to as apologists. And so he was a complicated guy and a complicated writer. as well.
Yeah. I've tried to read him. And I've tried to read people interpreting him too, so it doesn't get much easier. The legend. I mean, it's kind of like reading Hegel and his interpreters.
Right.
I think Kant is actually easier than Hegel, but one of the legends is that Kant, he taught, I believe, at a Lutheran institution, and his profession was, I mean, his Christian profession was at least outwardly Lutheran, and it was a tradition for the professors at chapel time to lead the students in a line to the chapel. And the legend I heard was he would take them to the door, he would watch them all go in, he'd close the door and leave. He did not enter.
Right. I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
It's widely repeated. I don't know if it's actually true or not, but it's certainly intellectually true. If he did go in, he was sort of like a lot of Christians are today, who they show up at church whether their minds do or not.
So I guess where I'm going with this is, if Schaeffer called it the upper story, the upper story, the lower story. The upper story, it sometimes has been labeled grace. The lower story has been labeled nature. And in any case, he shows different schema of how this plays out in different philosophies. But it always boils down to upper story, lower story, going back to Plato. And the question is that upper story, that realm of where God is, where ultimate truth is it accessible to us? If you're saying that all religions are basically alike, it seems that behind that statement, you have to be saying, well, we really can't really know what's up there. We can't really know beyond our five senses, but we can assume that whatever is up there, it's going to be nice and fair, and it won't mark us down on points for not really getting it exactly right. So we're all basically correct. In other words, the supreme being, whoever he is up there, is going to grade us on a curve in terms of how accurate we were in describing him or it or them or whatever. So it really doesn't matter in the end, because we can't get to that anyways.
Well, I think that is the presupposition of most pluralists, if not all. And what we see is that the sort of academic pluralism that John Hick was doing, which was very sophisticated, and that Paul Nitter has done, is trickling down into our culture, into what I would call Starbucks pluralism. That's the average person sitting around drinking coffee or having wine, thinking over deep thoughts. It's not actually the academic variety, but it's a derivative of it. And so frequently I will hear, and of course New Orleans is we are a small city, not nearly as large as Chicago, but a lot of people who want to think deep thoughts and play jazz before they come to New Orleans. And so I've talked to a number of people who would say something like all religions are basically saying the same thing or doing the same thing. And that tells me that they've never studied religion, because I do. And I can, the average person would say all religions think there's a God. Well, that's not true. Average person would say all religions think that that you have to live a particular moral code. Well, that's not true. All religions have holy books. That's not true. All religions have a belief in the afterlife or a soul. Well, that's not true. They all have rituals or holy days. That's not true. And so the way I like to think about religions is that they have family resemblances, but you can have great differences within a family. It's more like being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. In 2002, I was diagnosed with RA, rheumatoid arthritis, and I was surprised to learn that it was a kind of guessy process of diagnosing it. That if you had 4 of 7 symptoms, they had a list of 7 symptoms, and if you had any 4 of them for 2 months at a time, then you were considered to have rheumatoid arthritis. And so one person could have symptoms 1, 2, 3, 4, but not 5, 6, and 7. Another person could have 4, 5, 6, and 7, but not 1, 2, and 3. Both of them would have RA, but only share one symptom in common. Or a third person could have 1, 3, 5, 7. And so he would share 2 with each of the others, but he would be different in 2 ways as well, or 2, 4, 6, 7. And so you find a great deal of variety. And so it really makes no sense to say that all religions are the same or even essentially the same.
Well, here to illustrate your point, this is from a website called the London Economic. I don't know if that's the whole title of it, but that's the londoneconomic.com. Baby girl born with 3 hands is worshipped as a god. And this is in India. And this is something that you could show, I think, as an illustration of just how different Hinduism is from Christianity. This is something that would never even remotely happen within Christianity. And I find it very difficult to maintain the position that all religions are basically alike when you have a story like this in the news.
Right.
Well, there's something that is 2 things. One, Legeneres points out that we can't know completely, but we can know truly. So there are things that we can know that are true things. Number one. Number 2, I think of the Jane's story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Now, I'm going to go over that quickly because I think there's something really important that most people seem to miss. And it starts out that once upon a time, there lived 6 blind men in a village. One day, the villagers told them, hey, there's an elephant in the village today. They had no idea what the elephant is. They decided, even though we're not able to see it, let's go and feel it anyway. And all of them went where the elephant was. Every one of them touched the elephant. One said the elephant is like a pillar. Another said, no, it's like a rope. Another said it's like the thickness of a tree branch as he touched part of the elephant, his tail. Another said it's like a big fan as he grabbed a hold of the ear. Another said it's a huge wall as he just touched the belly of the elephant. And the last one was like it's a solid rope as he touched or pipe, as he touched the tusk of the elephant. So their conclusion of this whole thing is that even though we're only feeling a part of it, we have a true part, and we have an idea then of what God is like based on that part. Now, here's the fundamental problem with the story. The sighted people know what the elephant is. The blind people don't know what the elephant is, and they are making up false descriptions of the elephant. Wouldn't you say that that's a problem?
Well, that is an analogy that I frequently hear, and the problem with the analogy is that you have to understand what an elephant is as a whole to make any sense to you. You have to know what the tusk of an elephant is. You have to know what the trunk of an elephant is, what the ear, the legs, the side, the tail, that sort of thing. You have to know all these things for the story to make any sense. But if you know all these things, then you're understanding an elephant in its entirety, not partially. And so the one thing that the pluralist says nobody can have, the pluralist has to have to make his point in the analogy. And so it defeats itself.
Right. It is self-defeating, right? And none of the blind guys were right. They were all wrong as to what the elephant is.
I think the analogy would be, so long as you say like, they were partially right, but partially right is mostly wrong, and so one of the things that pluralism does is that they reduce the core beliefs of all religions to secondary beliefs. things that are non-negotiable to things that are negotiable. For instance, let's take two of the most obvious and largest world religions, Christianity and Islam. To the Christian, the Orthodox Christian, God is one God who has eternally existed in three persons. We are Trinitarian monotheist. And the Muslim is a monistic monotheist. There is no God but Allah. And so to the Muslim, our doctrine of God is blasphemy. And to us, it is our most valuable and distinctive belief. These doctrines can't be reduced to the secondary, but the pluralists must reduce the monistic monism and our Trinitarian monistic monotheism and our Trinitarian monotheism to secondary beliefs for us to be on the same level. And so pluralism is not the absence of a worldview. It's a worldview itself.
Right.
It's a totalizing worldview that does violence to other beliefs. It's not treating all beliefs equally. It's subjugating all beliefs except pluralism.
Right. And many would, in that view, attempt to use the Bible in a variety of ways to make it at least sound like it supports this pluralistic idea. To that end, we have one of our sponsors from World's End Theology.
No, these are our friends here at the Bible Buffet, and they have some questions. Yes, are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the Word and the meat of the Word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the Word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to look into the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. At the Bible Buffet, everything is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. All of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. This week, the regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, not your father's worship experience.
So if you don't like the idea of Christianity being too narrow, you can just go to the Bible Buffet and you can pick and choose whatever you want, add, delete, and create your own pluralistic.
Hey, you can. I hear they're working on entrees where you just kind of like mix Islam and Christianity and Judaism and a few, seasoning with Buddhism and stuff like that. It's amazing.
Yeah, or you can invite Richard Rohr maybe to your church, and
it's amazing what they can do.
So at the Parliament of the World's Religions, for example, one of the most common phrases that I heard was that all roads lead to God. Mm-hmm. And as I have taught on this over the last few years, I generally do surprise churches when I say that as I hear that, it actually is true. All roads do lead to God. And I get a lot of raised eyebrows. But, the problem isn't the path that gets you there. The problem is what happens at that meeting.
Right.
Right, because it says that every knee will bend and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. So the question is, if you do it in this life before you breathe your last, at that meeting, you will be then invited to spend eternity with God. However, everyone else is still going to make that confession. They're just waiting until the judgment day at that meeting when they will be judged and separated from God eternally. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, I'm a Christian. I'm an evangelical Christian, and I absolutely think that's correct. The problem would be in sharing that with another person. It wouldn't persuade them if they didn't believe that to begin with. Right. But I do think that we have to talk about contradictory truth claims and how it is that that religion A can have its set of truth claims, religion B can have their own truth claims, religion C have still different truth claims. Truth is the issue, and frequently what we find happens in our postmodern culture is that people want to say, well, nobody can know the truth, and of course they're absolutely certain that nobody can know the truth. But if it's true that nobody can know the truth, then it's not true.
How would they know, right?
Yeah, it's self-defeating, and then just like saying there's no such thing as truth. But I found a way that I think is foolproof to convince people that they really do believe in truth, and I don't have to use any 50-cent philosophical terms. I simply ask them a question: have you ever been lied to? And everybody knows that they've been lied to. But understand this: if there's no such thing as truth, then there's no such thing as a lie. A liar is somebody who willfully states something other than he knows it to be, and so a lie requires the reality of truth. But we all know that we've been lied to. What I think people generally mean when they say these sorts of things is that that nobody can be absolutely certain about the truth, and that people disagree about it. But the good news is you don't have to be 100% certain about the truth. You just need a sufficient reason to believe, and then you also need that thing to be true. Years ago, I had a seminary professor colleague who came to me and said, I'd like you to go to lunch with me and my college-age son. My son is going through a struggle with his faith. And in fact, my wife and I are meeting tonight with a family whose college-age daughter is beginning to have some issues and struggles with her faith. So it's not infrequent that these things happen. And so I agreed to go to lunch, and we went out to lunch, and so he shared some of his struggle and so forth, and I began to ask him questions just to figure out exactly what his issues were. And I recommend that's what you do when you talk to people, is that you find out what they believe, not what their religion supposedly believes, because there are Hindus, Buddhists, Baptists all over the world who don't believe correctly on their own belief system. And so you want to find out what the real life human person sitting in front of you believes. And so I was doing this, and pretty quickly I thought I figured it out. And so then I asked him if I was understanding him correctly. And I recommend this as well. I said, so if I understand what you're saying, you think the evidence for Christianity is pretty good, but you're concerned because you're not 100% certain, yet Christianity calls for a 100% commitment on your part, a total existential commitment. And he said, that is it exactly. So this young guy's about 19. And I said, let me ask you another question. Would you like to get married? Oh, I want to get married. I'm going to get married. Okay. So when you get married, would it be okay with you if the woman you marry was not always faithful to you? She didn't cheat on you very often, say like once every leap year. Or would you like to have a wife that was always faithful to you? He said, I want a wife who's always faithful to me.
Selfish.
I said, okay, so how would you ever know? You can never be absolutely certain. And he said, well, I guess I couldn't be absolutely certain that she was faithful to me. I said, so I guess you're never going to get married. Oh, I'm going to get married. But you can't be absolutely certain. I'm going to get married. but you can't be absolutely certain, and marriage calls for a total commitment of yourself,
100%.
just like Christianity does. And you could see the light come on in his mind. And I think that's really where a lot of people are. They have this idea that anything that requires 100% commitment requires 100% logical certainty, but we don't have 100% logical certainty about most things that we actually know.
Right.
Think about a jury trial. The verdict in a criminal trial, the threshold for proof is not beyond any doubt. It's beyond a reasonable
doubt.
And people lose their lives over that sort of thing. So it's just not true that extraordinary beliefs or truth claims require extraordinary evidence, even though you'll hear it all the time on the internet. No belief requires extraordinary evidence. Some beliefs have extraordinary evidence, but all beliefs require sufficient reason to believe them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and wouldn't it be the case, you were talking about pluralist earlier, isn't it really the case that pluralism is as narrow as Christianity is?
Oh, yeah. For instance, I was watching a television show several years ago, and I've quoted regularly in my lectures, so I can quote it on the spot. And it involved a Jewish rabbi named Shmuley Boteach.
Oh, sure.
And he was upset with Southern Baptist, and he and Al Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, were on the Larry King Show. And the rabbi said this. He said, "I am absolutely against any religion that says that one faith is superior to another. I don't see how that is anything different than spiritual racism. It's a way of saying that we are closer to God to you, and that's what leads to hatred." Now, what he didn't realize when he made that was he had just said that religions that don't say they are superior to others are superior to religions that do.
Right.
You don't get out of the conundrum of truth. Truth is exclusive. It excludes falsehood. And it's a good thing that the truth is that way.
Well, earlier you were talking about logical certainty, and, my mind immediately says, well, we weren't saved by grace through logical certainty. We were saved by grace through faith, and at some point you have to turn to Hebrews 11 in your theology and in your apologetic even, and say, there are certain things we are said to know by faith.
Right.
And faith is, in Scripture, it's treated as a kind of knowledge. It's treated as a way of knowing. Knowing on the basis of the Word of God. Mm-hmm. And of course, at some point, every belief does become circular in its reasoning. In other words, how do I know that the truths of mathematics are right? Well, you can't prove them. You simply have to assume them, or you can't do any math.
Right.
So, the quest for absolute certainty is an impossible quest in just about any field of knowledge.
Right.
I mean, that's what David Hume. Well, that's what Hume taught Kant, at least.
Isn't it the case that math, for example, is self-validating as you use it, whereas faith is, as I understand it, faith is not faith in God is not a sort of a blind leap into the abyss of not knowingness. Well, I don't know, so I'll jump. But rather, faith is based on pre-existing evidences that we can see and that we can know. I mean, Romans 1 tells us that we know God exists. How do we know that? Because the universe is here. You only have two options really in the question. A, it just popped into existence by itself from nothing, by nothing, for no apparent reason. That would be the Darwinian view. Or B, I mean, we can switch the letters, I don't really care, that a knowing, self-existent being caused the universe, brought it into existence. So that's kind of your option. So we have evidence that the universe exists.
Well,
And then we move from there. So we come to faith based on pre-existing data that we can extrapolate to make a reasonable decision.
I think one thing that frequently happens is a misunderstanding of faith. Faith is not, like Mark Twain said, it's believing what you know ain't so.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Dawkins has ranted for years that faith is belief without evidence, in spite of a lack of evidence, maybe because of a lack of evidence. Faith and evidence are not opposed to one another, but faith goes beyond the evidence, but is consistent with the evidence and grounded in the evidence. It's like when you're outdoors, and maybe I can think of many places in British universities that are this way, where you have flights of steps up, outdoor flights of stairs, and it's a dark night, and you can see the first step, but you can't see all the steps, and yet you walk up the steps without any concern that after step 10, there's going to be a gap between that and step 13. You're going to fall and break a leg. You have a reason to believe that what you cannot see is there, and it's grounded in our knowledge of God. It's a personal knowledge, and a lot of times people who will misunderstand faith will appeal to Hebrews 11, chapter verse 1. Faith is the evidence of things that are not seen, but the reason that they're not seen is not because they're impossible to see. It's that they haven't happened yet. They're future realities. But our faith is grounded in our present and past knowledge of God, of His behavior.
Right.
And so it's like the promises that my wife and I made to one another at our wedding 35 years ago. A promise is only as good as the person who's making it.
Right.
But we meant them, and we could believe them, and we still do believe them because we know the person behind the promise.
Of course, the author of Hebrews says, the first thing he says after giving his definition of faith is, he says, by faith we know that the universe was created not out of things that are seen, but of things that are invisible. So then he goes into Abel and so on. So
right.
there is a faith in the past in terms of what where we come from, where is the origin. Right. But the thing is, when you question the secular view of origins, you're told that you're anti-science.
Right.
And yet the secular view of origins is just as religious, requires just as much faith.
Right.
Maybe more faith.
Well, we would say that in terms of, and yet the questions come from, okay, where's the evidence for this, where's the evidence for a universe that came out of nothing, or a universe that came from a singularity in which the rules of physics were totally different? Where is that evidence?
And where did the singularity come from?
Right.
Well, I do think those are important questions. I don't talk to many pluralists who are thinking in that way. I think those sorts of objections come from modernity and from materialism. The pluralist is coming from a postmodern perspective, and one of the questions we heard in the little spot that we watched earlier, I don't know if it was actually broadcast, but that Don sent me, was with all the number of religions, who's to say who's who's right. And pluralists get distracted by the huge number of religions that there are in the world. And that's correct. There are a huge number of religions in the world. Sometimes I'm challenged. How do you know that your religion is the only true religion? Have you checked every other religion? Well, of course not. I can't even name every other religion, and I do this.
Exactly. And there's new ones starting all the time.
Nobody could do that sort of thing, but the truth is you don't need to. When you have a belief, when you have beliefs that you think are true and you have good evidence for their truthfulness, when you are challenged by something that is contrary to those, you presume that they are wrong. For instance, kind of a comical story that happened years ago. This was like 20 years ago. My first year on faculty here, we lived on the campus because we couldn't afford to buy a home in New Orleans at what a professor makes. And so in the middle of the night, we still had landlines back then. We're awakened by the phone ringing, and I stumble out of bed and I answer the phone on the kitchen wall, and it's campus security. And they asked this question that I never thought I'd hear at 3 a.m. Do you have a dog? Yes, we have a dog. Well, is your dog in your backyard? Well, she's supposed to be. You check and see if your dog is in the backyard. So I get dressed, go out in the backyard. Sure enough, our dog is not in the backyard. Come back to the phone. No, the dog's not there. Would you look on your carport and see if the dog on your carport is your dog? It was. But I asked the guy, why didn't you start right there? If I had seen my dog on the carport, I would know my dog was not in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that sort of thing with religious truth. Now, understand what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you just make up your mind what you want to believe and anything different is false. And I'm not saying that there aren't some challenges that we have to take seriously, but they need to be backed up by more than I disagree. We need to go to the why do you disagree? What evidence leads you to think that your belief is true rather than my belief, which is supported by this set of evidence and this way of reasoning. And so serious challenges we have to take, get ready for it, seriously. But somebody having a different opinion than we do or worshiping in a different way than we do is no reason to question how we reason and how we worship. We need more than that from them. We offer more than that to them, so they ought to offer more than that to us. Does that make any sense?
It does. Now, our question is Christianity too narrow? I want to go to narrowness for a moment.
Okay.
Because somehow narrowness seems to invalidate it as being true, objectively true. And so I'm going to appeal to Dr. Norman Geisler, but I'm going to tell a story from my vantage point, but it's comes from something that he has said, and that is 48 years ago, Joy and I married, so we're talking about narrowness and divisiveness. If you have a narrow view, you are by nature divisive. When Joy and I married 48 years ago, I promised to divide from all other women. Nobody thought that was either narrow or divisive. They thought it was the right thing to do. Why? Because you are pledging to a particular kind of a relationship. Now, that doesn't make other relationships. It just makes, here's what we do in our marriage. It's going to be narrow and it's going to be divisive. I'm going to divide from all other women. Did anybody rise up and say there was something wrong with that? Nobody did.
Mm-hmm. we might be getting closer to the day when they do. We might.
Yeah. Well, California just made it illegal in the legislature to use the terms he or she that's now wrong. You can't do that. So you might be right. We're getting to that point where it might be too narrow and divisive. Ron, are you ready for a break?
Yeah, we need to hear from some of our friends here. We have some questions, and that is, do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways and the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and Muslim Jesus. At the Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements, the cost of admission, your eternal soul, required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty, the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City. Don't want to miss it.
So you don't want to be limited then to a narrow Jesus. You can have a designer Jesus. Just make them after your own image. But would that be the true Jesus is the question.
Right. Yeah, and I think that what I see as somebody studying various religions is that most religions like Jesus. They want Jesus. They just want Jesus on their terms and their understanding or distorting of Jesus. And so we need to continue to press for the historical Jesus, for the biblical Jesus, and we need not to be afraid to challenge people as to the reasonableness of their truth claims, and they are going to make truth claims. Even people that say religious truth claims are taboo, well, that's a religious truth claim.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to lovingly, patiently, reasonably draw them back into rational ways of interacting, and it takes a while, and every individual is unique and has their own issues. So it's not enough for us to read books on Mormonism. We need to actually talk to some Mormons and read books on Watchtower or Hinduism or Islam. We actually have to interact with living, breathing people. And my experience is almost nobody believes the book doctrine down the line. And that's one of our problems, is that many pluralists don't really understand any religion, much less Christianity. For instance, as a philosopher, what I was taught about Hinduism and Buddhism in my philosophy classes, largely, and a lot of it was accurate, but a lot of it was not accurate. For instance, we had the three-armed little baby girl that's being worshipped by some Hindus in India. Well, when you get to India, you find out that Hinduism is very different depending on which Hindu you're talking about or talking to, and that it's not pantheistic in the level of living it out. It's polytheistic on the ground, and that sort of thing. And what you will read in academic Buddhism is that Buddhists don't believe in God. If you go to Vietnam and talk to Buddhists there, they will swear to you that Buddha is God. And so these sorts of real life situations just require some navigation, some persistence.
They do. In fact, we have, I had shared with you, we're doing this Explore God Chicago right now, and we have a discussion group that we're doing on Saturday nights. And one of the individuals attending is a Buddhist. And the very first week that part of the discussion came up, and it was pointed out that many Buddhists are atheists and others are agnostic on the question. And he said, well, they might be atheists, but that doesn't mean that no Buddhists believe in God. He says, actually, the Buddha never took a position about whether God exists or not. So it sort of depends on who trains you in Buddhism, what you will believe.
Right.
I thought that was it was important for the Christians who were gathered there to hear that from a Buddhist, so that they know here's what he personally believes. That doesn't speak to what all Buddhists or even most Buddhists believes, but what he believes.
Right. And all these other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, when you read the literature, you will find exclusivistic statements. So Christians are not the only ones making narrow statements.
Now, earlier you spoke of, trying to bring people, patiently bring people into a reasonable discourse. But it seems to me, after watching a lot of Richard Dawkins videos and a few other people's, that there are some people who don't want to be brought into a reasonable, reasoned, rational, irenic discourse. They're really just not open to any of those approaches. What do we do with them?
Well, we have problematic personality types in every religion. And we Christians have jerks among our number as well.
No, you're kidding.
But
I can name some. Okay.
Interestingly enough, the atheists that I interact with generally, and atheists are not monolithic either, but generally they will agree with us that there is one truth. And so I kind of feel at home among your modern 21st century North American atheists.
Mm-hmm.
We agree on the issues of truth. And
I think Dawkins would agree.
Yeah, Dawkins would say all religions are wrong. All takes on religion are wrong, other than atheism.
Mm-hmm.
Any belief in God is a delusion, and I think he would also say any religion is a delusion, even those atheistic ones.
Well, you have him, but then you have also now Penn Jillette, who I happen to like, who does a whole thing is about 3 minutes long. He's an atheist. He does this whole thing. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long, saying, if you really believed Christianity was true, you would evangelize, and I would be hurt if you didn't evangelize, because that would mean you don't care enough about my eternal life to tell me the truth.
Right.
Now, that is intriguing to me, to have an atheist say, I want you to be evangelizing if you really care about people.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And for instance, that's what I will tell the Mormon or the Jehovah's Witness when they knock on my door. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for being concerned enough to visit me and share with me what you believe is good news. And I appreciate that. And I want to have a conversation with you. And because one or both of us is mistaken. And now logic tells me that if a Christian and a Mormon are talking, that if the Christian is right, the Mormon is wrong. If the Mormon is right, the Christian is wrong. But we don't know from the fact that the Mormon is wrong that the Christian is right, logically speaking.
Right. It could be that they're both wrong.
Maybe Islam is right and we're both mistaken, or atheism is correct. And so, but there still is an appreciation for a rational way of thinking about life and religion. For instance, I shared with you Rabbi Boteach's irrational way of looking at it. Amy Jill Levine is a good friend of mine. I don't know if you recognize that name. She is one of the world's best known New Testament scholars. She teaches at Vanderbilt University, and she is a practicing Jew, not a Christian. but she is over and over in person and in print defended our right to evangelize and so forth and so on. And she says things like the evangelical Christian should be free to try to convert me. Such an attempt is biblically warranted and consistent with their theology. And she says, I remain free to say, no, thank you. I wouldn't want anybody telling me that my own beliefs, Jewish as they are, have only local value. I wouldn't presume to do the same to another. And so we do have allies in this matter of truth in religion who disagree with us as to what the truth is. But there are people like Penn Jillette or Amy Jill Levine who see at least the rules of the game clearly, at least the terms on which the conversation should take place correctly, in my view. But they simply disagree with us as to,
you know, we've made our culture's made some monumental shifts over the last century. You were mentioning postmodernism, kind of the idea that there is no absolute truth. There's only what's true for you is what's true for me. It has been said that we've gone from postmodernism to something we might call transmodernism. In postmodernism, the spokesman to culture tend to be the politicians and lawmakers, that sort of thing, in philosophers. In transmodernism, celebrities become the spokesperson to culture. And then it becomes all based on how I feel about things, not anything that's objectively true. And so when we talk about global warming, for example, it has nothing to do with science. It has to do with how easily can I, as a celebrity, make you afraid of doing whatever because you might destroy the planet in the next 12 years, as Oxio, whatever her name is, just said. She's a celebrity.
Alexandra Occasional Cortex, is that who you're talking about?
That's the one. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Or you have is it Maria? What's her name? With the little dog.
A little dog.
Paris Hilton.
Yeah, Paris Hilton. Yeah, it was one of the hotels. Yeah.
Oh, one of those.
Paris Hilton was suddenly, the spokesman to culture, the all-knowing Paris Hilton with her little dog. Yeah. And everyone was just, imbibing on her every word as though she actually knew something.
Right.
And so now we've come to the place where there is no objective gender. It is whatever you feel like today. And if you say, well, no, there is only male and female, then you are narrow-minded, bigoted, and must be stopped at all cost, because you simply can't say that. Right. And now they're trying to move to make it somehow legal, only legal for you to use the gender that the person is self-identifying by. But what if they change that tomorrow? So do they have to, in that new legislation, also require that every day you have to announce what your current gender preference is?
Yeah, well, so that is a good example of how Christians are seen as narrow. And but the interesting thing is that this open-mindedness only applies in certain contexts, in certain situations. For instance, if I think that I'm a woman and I have an automobile accident and go into the emergency room, and they are going to treat me as what I biologically am, not as to what I psychologically perceive myself to be. If my blood type is O positive, but if I think that I'm a minority and that I have an AB negative blood type, they are going to test my blood and treat me as a male with O positive blood, not as a Chinese person with AB negative blood. And these sorts of things bear out that in practice, these positions are just unsustainable. And this is a subtle form of denying the truth, and absurdity follows from denying the truth.
Right. Now, so how does this all fit into the question of, is Christianity too narrow? Well, Christianity has several qualifiers within it: that God exists, that he created everything that does exist, and that within that creation, he's created male and female. That's what's clearly spelled out in Scripture, and upheld all the way through. That man may deviate from that, but that's what it is. It's a deviation from his creation, and it is called sin as a result of those deviations.
Well, I think it's even worse than denying Christianity. It's a subtle deny. It's a very subtle way of denying truth, and even beyond that, denying nature. That nature tells us these sorts of things. That a man would still be a man, and a woman would still be a woman, even if Christianity were false, even if Jesus were not raised from the dead, even if he were not divine or never lived. That is the way nature actually is, and all scientists presuppose a stability and consistency in nature. And so we're not only ranting against Christianity, we're not only ranting against rationalism, but our culture is actually ranting against nature. And these are self-destructive ideas.
Right.
And
right.
I have no doubt that there will be a course correction. I don't know when it will be, but even pagan people have enough sense to stop doing self-destructive things after a while.
Well, you would think so. I have a question, and then we're going to kind of start winding toward a wrap up. Penn Jamin, one of our frequent viewers, asked if there's a link to Amy supporting evangelism.
Yeah, I can. In her article in a book called Moving Beyond New Testament Theology, she wrote an article, Homeless in the Global Village. So this is a collection of essays. I think it's for Heike Oberman, but it's a European scholar, and it's a number of essays by a number of renowned scholars celebrating the career of this particular scholar. In academics, we call them Festschrifts. In German means celebratory writing. So she says it about page 195 and 96 in this. So the article is Homeless in the Global Village. The book is Moving Beyond New Testament Theology.
Okay, so there's that question, and you're right. We're kind of on a course. Unless there's a course correction, things are going to get pretty bad, because you have questions like, okay, if you are only what you self-identify as, and so you're biologically male and you self-identify as a female, and let's say a state like California says, okay, all corporations must have a female on your board of directors. What if one of the board of directors simply self-identifies as a female? Have they conformed to the law? And if not, why not? So will the legislature have to then define what a female is? Mm-hmm. Or is it simply what they feel like? Yeah. Is there such a thing anymore as women's rights? Why are we marching for women's rights? Because you don't know what a woman is anymore. I mean, it really kind of throws things out the window.
In the news this morning, I read that a lesbian member of some board was kicked off the board for violence. The violence was that she kept referring to a male transgender, a transgender female as he.
Mhm.
And he's not, I don't think he's had the operation yet or something like that. Well, for whatever reason, she was referring to him as a he. And this is what caught my attention is that now we are defining the word. We've already changed the definition of the word racism, although that new definition is, I've yet to see it in a dictionary, but it's the functioning the functioning definition for so many people. Well, now we're using words like violence to, and this is the word violence has really been, they've been doing this for a long time, but now it's, you can be accused of violence for just about anything.
Mhm.
Okay, so Christianity is narrow. By definition, it's narrow. Jesus said this odd thing, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. That's pretty narrow. That is from the words of our Lord himself. And that would mean any other way is excluded from a right relationship to God. Pretty clear and pretty narrow.
Yeah, I think
said that, yeah.
one thing that I think frequently is missed is I hear this statement, there's some truth in every religion, as though that proved anything. And in fact, I agree with that. There is some truth in every religion. No religion that everything it taught was demonstrably false could possibly get off the ground. You couldn't attract any followers if everything you said was just not true. But that's not the relevant question. The question is there any other savior? How many saviors are there? And so Christians have never said that we are the only people that understand the family, or that we are the only people that understand human rights, those sorts of things. What we've said is that Jesus is the only savior. He is the only way to being right with God. And so then the fundamental question is, how many saviors are there? Is it Jesus alone, or is there some other savior? And I'm persuaded that Jesus is the only savior of the world.
All right. Now, that doesn't give you, because it's narrow, that doesn't make you wrong. Because it's narrow, it doesn't mean that Christianity advocates actual violence, not just verbal violence or disagreeing with somebody is called violence, but that it is morally wrong to harm somebody physically because they disagree. It doesn't give you that right.
Right.
Right. It doesn't entitle you to be mean to other people, but that would be actual meanness, not just disagreement. The problem is our language has become so fuzzy these days, as Ron has pointed out, that it's almost impossible to communicate in some circles in any meaningful way, because words just don't even have proper definitions anymore. So we are, as always, we are running over time. I thank you for the time that you've given to us. And by the way, for those who are interested, we are having a conference at your fine institution here, May 2nd and 3rd, or 1st and 2nd?
I believe it's the 2nd and the 3rd. I can look it up.
Yeah, I'm going to look it up real quick here. It's April, May 2nd and 3rd. It's a Thursday and Friday, 2nd and 3rd, at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. You can go to the website, emnr.org, and sign up. And we're going to have a right fine time being narrow-minded down there.
Oh, there you go.
Ron, you want to walk us out of here?
Sure, why not? Our resident, okay, you were going to get going here, aren't you? Okay, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil B. Formey. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary culinary services comes from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Oleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew LeBlanc. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for its content, although you will never prove it in a court of law.
Never gonna happen.
Ain't gonna happen.
All right, Bob. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob.
Ron. We'll talk to
Okay,
you next week.
thanks for having me.